Welcome back. Now, things are getting pretty exciting because we can fire our rifle, or I should say rifles, plural, and that's pretty amazing, but we still can't move around. I'd like WASD movement to move around in space, and we'll get to that, but what I'd like even more is to be able to move my mouse and look around and rotate our drone. So, to do that, we need a new type of input action. We made one input action for IA Fire, which has the value type digital bool. We've seen that it's true when the button is pressed and false when it's not, but we need something different for mouse input. When I move my mouse left and right, I want to rotate left and right. And likewise, when I move my mouse up and down, I want to rotate up and down. In other words, we have two different values. A value for moving left and right, we call that the mouse x-axis, and one for moving our mouse up and down, we call that the mouse y-axis. So we're going to make a new input action for that. And because we're now going to have more than one, let's make a folder here in Input, new folder, called Input Actions. And move IA Fire in there. Make sure when you drag it onto the folder, you click Move here and not Copy here. You don't want to copy that. And here in Input Actions, we're going to go to Input and create a new input action called IA Look. This will be for looking around with our mouse. Let's open that up. And this one's value type is not going to be digital bool. It's going to be axis 2D because we have two axes when it comes to mouse movement. The x-axis, moving left and right, and the y-axis, moving up and down. So let's choose that. And let's open IMC Bot and click plus next to mappings to add a second mapping. Open the dropdown and choose IA Look and expand that. Now I'm going to open the dropdown, go to Mouse, and choose Mouse XY 2D Axis. Now this is going to trigger every frame as long as our mouse is moving. We can expand that. We can see that we can add triggers and modifiers if we want. But for now, we're just going to leave it as is. And we need to respond to IA Look by going into BP Bot Pawn, into Event Graph, right-clicking and searching for IA Look. And we want that event, so let's get that. Now, this one has an action value that's different than the action value for IA Fire. Remember, IA Fire has the digital bool type, right? So it returns a boolean when it's triggered, but IA Look is vector 2D. Now, a vector 2D is very similar to a vector, except instead of X, Y, Z, it only has X and Y. It does not have Z because it's not a three-dimensional vector, it's only a 2D vector. Now, it's a structure, and just like hit results, which are structures, we can break it. We can always drag off of a structure type and search for break and break this particular type of structure. If we choose break vector 2D, we can access its contents, which just happen to be X and Y values. Now here's how it works. As we're moving our mouse left and right, we'll have a value for X, which is indicative of how quickly we're moving the mouse. Same for the Y. So what we want to do is move something when our mouse moves. Now it's tempting to say, well, we should get our spring arm and we should set its rotation or add to its rotation. And yes, intuitively that would make sense, but what I'd like to move instead is my controller. Remember, our pawn has access to the controller. We accessed it up here in Begin Play with Get Controller. I'd like to rotate my controller whenever I move my mouse. Why? Because the controller is a great thing for other components to follow. If I rotate my controller, I can follow that with my spring arm, for example. So a lot of newcomers are confused by this decision to rotate the controller instead of some tangible component on the pawn itself. Why not rotate the mesh? Why not rotate the spring arm? Why rotate this invisible thing called the controller? We can't see the controller, and the controller doesn't have a mesh or anything. But the controller does have a rotation, and our components are designed to be able to follow the controller when it rotates. So it makes sense for something called a controller to control how our pawn rotates, and that's the direction we're going to go. So if we right-click, we can search for a function, add controller, and we have, look at this, 3 functions: add controller pitch input, add controller roll input, and add controller yaw input. Now we know what yaw, pitch, and roll are. Let's start with yaw. Add controller yaw input. This takes in a value, and this is the amount to add to our controller's yaw. And we've already seen that moving our mouse left and right is the x-axis of our action value. So as our IA look input action is triggered, every frame we're going to get a value for x based on how quickly we're moving left and right. So if we hook this up to triggered, and we hook up the x in for the value, we'll be moving our controller. We'll be adding to its yaw. And there are ways to follow the controller's rotation. For one, we can choose our spring arm. In the details panel, we can search for control. And look at this. There's a variable called use pawn control rotation. This is what allows our spring arm to follow it. Let's check that and go back and press play, engage in our viewport, and let's move our mouse left and right. And we can see that we're moving our spring arm, and our camera, being attached to that spring arm, is moving along with it. How about that? That's pretty convenient. Now our mesh is not moving, so I can rotate around to the front and I can see it. Let's say I wanted to see those cannons fire straight on. Pretty cool. Now that's only for the yaw, right? We saw that we can only move our mouse left and right. If we move up and down, nothing happens. Well, that's where that second axis comes in, the y-axis from our action value. We're going to use that for our pitch. So let's search for add controller pitch input. Let's hook that up and pass in the y-axis value from that broken vector. And let's see what happens now. Now we can move our mouse up and down. Now, if it feels unnatural to you, like you should be moving the mouse up and looking up instead of looking down, you may want to reverse the value for that y. You may want to reverse the sign. In other words, we could take y and multiply it by -1 and pass that in. But that's not the way to do it. The way to do it is by going to IMC bot to our IA look input action and add a modifier to it. Remember, modifiers modify the input action value after being triggered. So let's click plus to add a modifier, and we have a number of built-in modifiers. The one we're interested in is negate. And if we expand negate, we can negate or reverse the sign of any of the axes of our input action. Now, it doesn't have a Z because it's only a 2D input action, and we don't want to reverse the value of the X, so we can uncheck that. We just want to negate the Y. So if we have this input action negated on the Y-axis, then we can go back and move our mouse. And now when we move our mouse up, we look up instead of down because we've negated that input action value for the Y-axis. And now we're able to move our mouse and look around our pawn. Pretty nifty. Great job, and I'll see you soon.